Hey all, this is Reddit Oscar. Nintendo has released a interview with Hidetaka Miyazaki regarding the Duskbloods. In this interview, Miyazaki goes over a lot of details about the game, confirming and deconfirming a lot of speculation people have had about it. And with this information, I think most people will have a better understanding of what the game is. So let's go over the questions and answers that were given in this interview. First off, please tell us what led to this title being developed for the Nintendo Switch 2. In Miyazaki's own words, a while back we had the opportunity to meet with Nintendo to discuss ideas. And during this discussion we presented a rough outline for the Duskbloods. It was still very bare bones at the time, more of a loose string of ideas than a proper presentation. The concept itself was different from anything we had done before, and Nintendo seemed very interested in helping making it a reality. That's when the project kicked off. At first it was being worked on by a small team as a title for Nintendo Switch. However, as the game started to take shape, we were approached by Nintendo with talk of Switch 2, which led us to revamp our development path with this new hardware in mind. The new hardware's focus on online features allows us to stay as true to the original vision as possible, which was very good news for us. This is a good clarification to make. He confirms that the Duskbloods is a side project that started off with a small team working for the Nintendo Switch 1. I saw many people in my comments worried that this was not a side project, but rather their new big thing, so I'm glad that they can be put at ease. Continuing on with the interview. It sounds like the game differs from most of your previous titles. Can you give us a little more detail as to what type of game it is? In terms of structure, we consider it a PvPvE title. At its core, it's an online multiplayer-focused game, with both player versus player and player versus enemy gameplay. Did you always have the desire to make a PvPvE game? Yes, I've always found the PvPvE structure very interesting. It allows for a broad range of game design ideas while also letting us leverage our experience of designing challenging enemy encounters. As a side note, please allow me to address one thing. As previously mentioned, this is an online multiplayer title at its core, but this doesn't mean that we as a company have decided to shift to a more multiplayer-focused direction, with titles going forward. The Nintendo Switch 2 version of Elden Ring was also announced, and we still intend to actively develop single-player-focused games such as this that embrace our more traditional style. Again, this is another very useful clarification. With the announcement of Night Rain and now the Duskbloods, two multiplayer-focused FromSoft games back-to-back, many people were assuming that these experimental multiplayer titles constituted a shift in direction for the company. But here Miyazaki makes clear that the Duskbloods and Night Rain are what they appear to be. Smaller, multiplayer-oriented titles that they are going to release while they continue to work on their more traditional single-player-focused games. This is a little unrelated, but personally I hope that their next single-player title is not a Souls title. It doesn't have Souls gameplay. I think that one of the reasons why there has been some level of negative reaction to the Duskbloods and Night Rain is precisely because they are repurposing much of the Souls-like combat. People aren't able to appreciate Night Rain's and Duskbloods' more experimental elements. They don't see them as fresh and new because they are still using the core combat as its base. So I hope that the next thing that From Software announces is something that doesn't use that core Souls combat. I would prefer an Armored Core, a Sekiro-like, or a new IP with a different gameplay style. In fact, I'd rather have two, maybe several, new titles that don't rely on the Souls combat before we go back to the more traditional style. But back to the interview. Please tell us about the game's characters and setting. In Miyazaki's own words, the game's protagonists, or characters controlled by the player, are known as the Bloodsworn. The Bloodsworn are a group whose members have achieved superhuman abilities through the power of special blood. As a general concept, they're similar to vampires, but they are not portrayed as the horrifying monsters you might associate with traditional vampirism. We tried to extract the sort of romantic aspects we found interesting from concepts such as vampires and blood and reinterpreted them as the Bloodsworn. In the Duskbloods, the Bloodsworn are competing for something known as First Blood. As human society reaches an end, First Blood flows in an event known as the Twilight of Humanity. The Bloodsworn are summoned to the Twilight of Humanity across a variety of different times and places in a bid to obtain First Blood. Due to this, there is no fixed era or location in which the Duskblood takes place. There are more traditional Gothic or Victorian-style maps, as well as those depicting the closing years of the early modern period, like the one glimpsed in the trailer with the train running through it. Can you let us know the meaning behind the title The Duskbloods? The Duskbloods directly refers to the Bloodsworn themselves. As mentioned earlier, the Bloodsworn are summoned to the Twilight of Humanity in a battle for First Blood. Duskbloods is a collective term for these characters, controlled by the player. It sounds like blood plays a pretty big role in this game. Yes, in the context of this game, blood is used more conceptually as opposed to literal meanings like physical depictions of injury. Blood symbolizes one of the game's key themes, the history it holds, the power it passes on, the fates it weaves, and the marker of those who have surpassed the limitations of their own humanity. So, the Twilight of Humanity is an event. It happens as a human society reaches an end. That's why the time periods of the different locations look so distinct. They are in fact different maps in which you will be competing. The next part of the interview asks, what are some of the characteristics of the Bloodsworn? In Miyazaki's own words, there are several reasons we put the player's focus on the Bloodsworn, with one of those being character actions. The Bloodsworn possess superhuman abilities thanks to special blood, so their actions are more dramatic than anything we've seen in previous titles. Even basic character actions in this game such as sprinting, super jump, and double jump are designed to be dynamic and stress-free, and are complemented by each character's own unique weapons and abilities, allowing for a wide range of creativity. Also, while this isn't directly related to the Bloodsworn themselves, the setting allows for the depiction of firearms and such, and every character is equipped with some means of attacking from a distance. I feel this is one of the game's unique aspects when compared to our previous titles. I hope that these new action elements are one area that players will enjoy. Earlier you referred to protagonists or characters as plural. Does this mean that the player will be able to choose from multiple different characters? In Miyazaki's own words, yes, there are over a dozen characters for the player to choose from, each with their own identity and appearance. I think there are a lot of unique elements to the character designs and the weapons they use, so hopefully players can find one or two favorites among them. Also, each character can be customized to a certain extent, allowing players the fun of building a character that feels like their own. Okay, so they are individualized characters. It seems like they can be customized somewhat, but Miyazaki does say that they have unique weapons, which means that the weapons will probably be tied to specific characters. He says there's a lot of customization, so maybe you'll be able to customize the build of the character or the properties of the weapon, or you'll be able to choose one out of several weapons for each character. Either way, the characters are unique, and they'll have unique combat and traversal abilities. The interviewer then asks, can you provide more detail on the general gameplay loop? Miyazaki replies, the game has a so-called hub area where players can choose their character, customize them, and enter online multiplayer. Online multiplayer supports up to 8 players. Upon concluding an online match, players then return to the hub, at which point they receive some sort of reward, whether they win or lose. Using these rewards, players can further customize their characters, and so the cycle continues. Online matches are generally last player standing. However, there are certain cases where victory conditions differ. For example, players may be tasked with teaming up to take down a powerful boss, or find themselves in other special circumstances. So victory conditions are influenced not just by PvP, but by PvE as well? That's right, some victory conditions center around defeating a boss. I can't think of many examples with that rule set. It sounds very interesting. I'm happy to hear you say that. Regardless of whether it's PvP or PvE, the idea is to provide players with an experience that allows them to learn and hone their skills as they play. We've therefore designed the PvE boss encounter to present a tough challenge and a sense of accomplishment upon defeating them. So, players can also enjoy improving their own skills over time as they battle? Yes, although there are a variety of elements in place that keep the game from becoming too stoic. For example, how players conduct themselves during the match is just as important as direct combat. The Duskbloods implements victory points, which are responsible for ultimately deciding the outcome of a match. To obtain victory points, direct combat is of course important, but it's not the only way. Some players may prefer to earn victory points by avoiding direct combat and instead engaging in more opportunistic behavior. How you earn them is entirely up to you. Additionally, each character can summon an entity to assist in combat, giving players a high degree of freedom when it comes to how they fight and win. Another important aspect is match variables, such as the event system. This system has the potential to alter the course of the match, such as special enemy spawns and additional objectives with accompanying bonus rewards. In the trailer, you may have noticed a giant stone face looming in the sky. This is one example of the events that occur in a match. In this case, the appearance of this stone face affects the environment and changes match rewards, which can have an immediate impact on player motivations and objectives. These events don't happen all the time, and I hope discovering them gives players some incentive to keep coming back. It sounds like even those who tend to shy away from PvP can still enjoy themselves. That was the intention. I personally am not much of a PvP person, and I wanted to make something that's satisfying even for players like me. While the goal of the match is to obtain first blood, there are personal objectives that provide separate rewards to the player as well, so I hope these add to the fun of each engagement. What other ways might players enjoy the game outside of combat? One thing I love doing in any game I direct is leaving fragments of lore and world-building details, allowing the player the fun of using their imagination to make connections. The Duskbloods is no exception to this. However, we've gone about it a little differently from previous titles. The fragments this time are found in the previously mentioned character customization items. Their blood history and fate. Customizing a character will reveal a piece of information regarding the world and its unfolding story. You customize their blood history and fate? Yes. Analyzing and altering a character's blood history and fate allows players to customize all sorts of things, from their abilities, appearance, and inner characteristics to the role they play in the world and their relationship with other characters. Focusing these elements on the concept of blood or blood history and fate allowed for a deeper exploration of customization and is another reason we placed on the Bloodsworn as the protagonists. Do you mind sharing any other points you personally find interesting? One area I haven't talked about yet is roles. In online play, roles give players special responsibilities and objectives that often lead to unique interactions and relationships between players based on their corresponding roles. That's probably not much info to go on, so allow me to provide a few examples. But please note we're still finalizing some of the naming and details. For example, if a player possesses the Destined Rivals role, another player is designated as their rival, and they are tasked with finding and defeating that player. Doing so counts as achieving a personal goal, separate from the overall victory conditions. Another example is Destined Companion, where one player is required to seek out another designated as their companion, which results in a special reward if they form a bond with one another. Roles can be assigned to any character via blood customization, allowing players to enjoy role-playing in a literal sense and hopefully adding to the drama of these engagements. Kind of like how players can pick their roles in a tabletop RPG. Exactly. While not intentional, it may reflect my own interest a bit. It might seem a little unorthodox at first, but I hope players will give it a try. That reminds me, I was curious about the winged character seen in the trailer. Can you provide some details as to what role this character serves? That character shares a similar role with the Firekeepers of the Dark Souls series. They remain in the hub area providing the player with advice and guidance. I suppose you could say we tried doing something a little Nintendo-esque in the spirit of partnership. What do you mean by that? We tried doing something cute for a change. Although I will say this character is actually an elderly gentleman. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we finish? In addition to creating a PvPvE title, we've tried our hand at introducing a lot of new and interesting ideas with the Duskbloods. From superhuman player actions, a free-form combat approach, and gameplay that's dynamic and dramatic to the romanticized aesthetic of the Bloodsworn, deep character customization, and fragmentary storytelling, I think there's a lot to appreciate and enjoy in this title. I sincerely hope players look forward to it. Alright, so this is the greatest thing ever. For me, I am completely sold. I'm sold on the aesthetic, I'm sold on the different time periods that you go to. If anybody follows my streaming channel, you'll know that I really like the invasion system in Dark Souls games. But just like the co-op in Souls games and Elden Ring, it's also kind of tacked on. There's not as much of a focus on it. It's a single-player game that happens to have invasions. And so I'm very excited for this and also Night Rain. This is a game that has PvP as the focus, and Night Rain has co-op as the focus. From what we've heard in this interview, there aren't teams. You can ally with other people, but it seems like there are special circumstances for that. There won't be a situation where you start at the edge of the map with a co-op partner. Maybe in a future interview they'll give us information that changes that, but from what I see here, that doesn't seem to be the case. And that means that the co-op-oriented game is Night Rain, fully differentiating these two, which means that I take back what I said about Night Rain in my last Duskbloods video. Since they have different focuses, PvP and co-op, they aren't stepping on each other's toes, and I am once again excited for Night Rain as well. But for the Duskbloods specifically, I love everything I've seen. I like the concept, I like the premise, I like the idea, I like the atmosphere, I like the character designs, I like the fact that we're going to different environments based on the end of different time periods. It is really cool. And I hope we see some proper gameplay soon. Anyway, that's the end of this video. As always, thank you very much for watching.